The criminal justice system should be based on fair and just prosecution.
Did he or didn't he? Is he a great guy or is he a psychopath? Everybody loves a whodunit.
We are standing here today because that wasn't done 23 years ago.
Serial. The hit podcast Serial.
Ultimately, it was about narrative. It was much easier and much simpler to tell a good story. The murder of someone should not be intellectual property.
If you found my body, do not make a documentary about me.
It wasn't even about the evidence anymore.
Did they get the right guy? Yeah. It was junk science then, it's junk science now. Wrongfully convicting people coast to coast.
I remember sitting there thinking, how could they be getting this so wrong?
True crime hasn't really changed the justice system. It's changed the expectations of the justice system.
Hey listeners, what do we love more than true crime? Worrying about why we love it. But what if our troubling connection isn't to murder itself, but the telling of it, the story? In her book, The Invention of Murder, Judith Flanders writes how, at the height of Jack the Ripper's brutal murder spree, the newspapers were consumed with gruesome stories of the horrific crimes. Meanwhile, it was the images in the penny dreadfuls that authorities were most concerned with. The once text-based playbills could now be printed as artful posters. Authorities worried these pictures could do to the public what, quote, the taste of blood produces upon the tiger. But I wonder, in the backdrop of the jungle, is it the blood or the tiger that's to blame for this unquenchable thirst? 40 years after the Jack the Ripper murders, Chief Justice of England, Lord Hewart, proclaimed, "Justice should not only be done, but should manifestly and undoubtedly be seen to be done." Of course, what he meant was justice needs to be transparent and understood, not literally seen. But one could argue we went another way.
In the early 90s, the dawn of the era of true crime TV, there really were two watershed events. That wouldn't have been possible without the technology to do it.
Dramatic videotape obtained by...
The city of Los Angeles, in particular, was still reeling from the beating of Rodney King.
Captured on grainy home video.
The acquittal of Los Angeles police detectives in that beating.
And then the riots that followed.
They let them get away with what they did, so we gonna do what we gotta do.
It was a city on edge.
Of course, the O.J. Simpson slow speed chase.
The Bronco.
I'm going to use a pair of binoculars.
Here was this case involving a famous football star and actor, the gruesome murder of his ex-wife and a friend, Ron Goldman.
Died of multiple stab wounds. Their bodies were found outside her home.
It became clear early on in the investigation that O.J. Simpson was the prime suspect in the case.
Police have been collecting evidence at O.J. Simpson's
and
home.
There was physical evidence linking him to the crime.
Reddish-brown stains in the driveway. Newspaper reports say a blood-stained glove was found in the house.
And the next thing you know, this car on the highway was being televised everywhere.
The networks essentially preempted their entertainment coverage.
And then the media circus really began.
Slow down just a second.
We are in favor of open courtrooms.
The experience of being part of the so-called trial of the century, I don't think I realized what was happening as it was happening.
As the O.J. Simpson trial officially began, it was the typical media circus as the main participants arrived for day number one.
Because the judge, Lance Ito, made the decision to include cameras in the courtroom, it meant that the defense, and of course the prosecutors, weren't just trying the case in front of 12 jurors, they were trying the case in front of the entire world.
I'm often asked about the media coverage with my brother's case and if I thought it impacted the outcome. I think the media absolutely turned our case upside down. You know, I went to court every day. I didn't miss any testimony. I just was judged constantly, and it's uncomfortable because that's the lowest point in my life. And I remember coming home and, you know, we were watching the news and I remember sitting there thinking, that didn't happen. How could they be getting this so wrong?
LAPD's laboratory is a cesspool of contamination.
They would see police talking about how they investigate crimes and often how incompetently or how badly they investigated those crimes.
You say on your oath that you have not addressed any black person as a or spoken about black people as in the past 10 years, Detective Furman.
That's what I'm saying.
The networks, on one hand, seeing a public service, but on the other hand, saying, wait a minute, this is one of the most compelling things we'll ever see. And it was a circus, right? Judge Ito, the racist cop, the glove that didn't fit.
The gloves didn't fit. Bye.
All of those things all rolled into one. How could you not be interested in that?
So even though the OJ jury was sequestered, is it really reasonable to expect that they would never watch TV ever for 9 months? And they were really getting a crash course in reasonable doubt.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder, a felony upon Nicole Brown Simpson. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Ronald Lyle Goldman, a human being, as charged in count 2 of the information.
And I think I had to learn how to accept that because as a result of having the media have so much coverage, the world got to see how imbalanced our system is, and the world also got to see him be acquitted, but also know that he was guilty. So I'm thankful for that because people came to their own conclusion.
But unfortunately, there weren't many trials after that where the judge was willing to let the media in 24/7. So I was overseeing the crime programming on A&E, and Court TV hired me away to be one of the architects of their primetime crime strategy. The strategy was we'll do live trials during the day, and at night we'll do this sort of mystery, suspense, murder mystery programming. Forensic Files, Forensic Factor. They were procedural, about science. They launched a tremendous interest in the science of crime solving. True crime hasn't really changed the justice system. It's changed the expectations of the justice system.
True crime documentaries have a tendency to oversimplify the criminal justice system generally and the use of forensic sciences in particular.
Was it bad luck? Or, as one forensic scientist asked, was it too coincidental?
Because in a Forensic Files or Forensic Factor, any of those shows, the crime scene guys come in, 15 minutes later they have a sample, they shine that light on the wall, and someone is arrested.
The body's cold.
So a television show that became phenomenally popular in the early 2000s in particular was CSI.
How do you talk to a dead body? I let him talk to me, actually.
It's about crime scene investigations, right?
I fell to his death wearing prescription eyeglasses.
And so crime scene investigations typically involve forensic sciences, and it has been depicted on that show and very similar shows for 20 years as being objective, infallible, fast, conclusive. Show after show after show after show.
You can tell all that just by looking at a pair of eyeglasses? You have no idea.
It brought forensic science techniques to a mass media consciousness in a way that had never been done before. And so it created what is known as the CSI effect.
Concentrate on what cannot lie, the evidence.
It creates false expectations in lay audiences And the problem with that is that those are our jurors, and those are our judges, and those are our lawyers.
The actual practice of forensic science bears no relation to what was depicted on CSI and other crime shows.
Virtually all forensic techniques have led to wrongful conviction at one time or another, including early DNA evidence and fingerprint evidence and comparative bullet lead analysis and hair microscopy and shaken baby syndrome and blood spatter evidence and bite marks. A very high-profile case that doesn't have a lot of direct evidence and there's a lot of pressure for a conviction will lead to an early introduction of speculative evidence. And Ted Bundy is a great example of this.
Florida police are questioning a man they say may be one of the worst sex murderers of all time.
This afternoon, Bundy was taken to court, where he was...
It was the first nationally televised trial in American history.
You look at him and he seems so clean-cut. He was a law student, he presented well, he identified as a conservative, he had a partner at the time who had a young child, and yet all the while, even as he had this surface staid life, he was killing women with tremendous impunity.
They never had any fingerprints, they never had any hairs, they never had any confessions. And the case ended up rising and falling on bite mark evidence. But was junk science then? It's junk science now. Forensic dentists are no better at identifying a so-called human bite mark than you or I would be. Saying, hey, this is a bite mark, right? But that's a lot like looking at a cloud and deciding, doesn't that cloud look like an elephant? And then you convince your friend, oh yeah, that does look like an elephant, right? And then you can't unsee the elephant. That doesn't mean that it's an elephant.
Prior to his execution at the Florida...
Did they get the right guy? Yeah.
20-year-old Bundy confessed to the murders of almost 24 young women in...
I'm just saying that they used junk science to help convict a guilty person. A broken clock is right twice a day, but we shouldn't be using broken clocks.
At 8:30 this morning, Newfoundland time, Ted Bundy was put to death.
Let's just pretend he was innocent.
I knew that I'm innocent. I knew they got me wrong. Oh, they got all this wrong.
So the Innocence Files was a 9-part docuseries that we participated in.
Dr. Michael West decided that there were, I believe, 19 human bite marks on that body.
So this is the effect of the medias, right? So Michael West knew about the Ted Bundy case.
Marks found on the body of Christine Jackson were indeed and without doubt inflicted by Kennedy Brewer. You know, that's pretty bold proclamation.
The same core group of about 20 dentists, beginning with the 3 that testified at the Ted Bundy trial, that spread out around the country like a virus, wrongfully convicting people coast to coast.
Brewer, the order's been signed. You and the sureties on your bond are hereby discharged and are free to go.
I'm representing somebody that's on death row today from a Michael West case. So the legacy lives on. I think true crime is very important to raise issues and to demonstrate the reality that unreliable evidence is being used, the reality of wrongful conviction, because the jurors are bringing in all those television shows they watch and all those science classes that they didn't take. And that mix is how they're coming up with conclusions.
I never should have been the center of the story at all. I should have been a side note, a footnote. The actual murderer became a footnote.
2007, Perugia, Italy, an idyllic setting for what turned out to be a legal, sorrowful horror show.
She was in a foreign country. She was a young woman abroad. She had a roommate who was murdered.
Britain's Meredith Kercher was found stabbed to death in the apartment they shared.
Her killer tried to stop the bleeding, then put a sheet over the body.
She and a friend, Raffaele Solicito, were instantly accused of murdering Meredith Kercher.
I was working at People magazine covering human interest stories, and I had heard about the Amanda Knox case.
The Italian tabloids called her Angel Face. To others, she was a, quote, diabolical she-devil.
I went over there thinking that I was going to write a book exploring how an American girl turned into Charlie Manson overnight.
On the wall, a bloody hand mark. The prosecutor was certain it was devil worship.
It was somehow much sexier to concoct a conspiracy-laden story involving a pretty young girl from America.
The court says Meredith Kircher's wounds indicated that there was more than one aggressor.
Instead of the actual story, which is that a man broke in, raped and murdered a young woman, and was caught.
Complicating matters, another man is already serving time for sexually assaulting Kircher the night of her death.
It was very clear, very early on, who the murderer was.
The media probably affected how the prosecution and the cops circled the wagons early on. And, you know, when they realized we're going to have to stand up and say, wait, we made a mistake. No way, they weren't going to do that.
So I was no longer Amanda Knox.
Dubbed Foxy Noxy.
Foxy Noxy is going to get loxied in the box.
Somebody who would orchestrate a satanic sex game to serve the story of the prosecution.
Breaking news out of Perugia, Italy.
Tonight, an American college student has been found guilty of murder.
It was the first kind of fake news, digital era phenomenon.
American student Amanda Knox has been described as a satanic, diabolical she-devil at the appeal against
the British press, they just sort of went along with the prosecutor's case.
For a woman devoted to lust, drugs, and alcohol.
These are weaponized, organized groups that are flooding the zone, as Steve Bannon puts it, with shit.
He closed his final arguments by describing her as a deceitful witch as well.
So fact and fiction are mingled.
Knox is into some freaky sexual things.
And journalism is, you know, suspect.
Were you into deviant sex?
Like, we had algorithms that were feeding people, and it was all based upon engagement. It's what is the most outrageous. It is what is going to get people up in arms, because it doesn't really feel real. Or even if it does feel real, we still feel a sense of like ownership over the person that is not actually due.
Free after 4 years in an Italian prison.
Knox is now back home in Seattle.
She's walking into a hornet's nest.
And so along comes someone like Nancy Grace.
Nancy Grace is going to cover the trial tonight.
Nancy Grace became famous for vilifying criminal defendants on CNN for about 15 years.
Amanda Knox dreamed of the moment her roommate was murdered.
Hot taking other people's worst experiences.
DNA on the murder weapon, her DNA on the murder weapon.
That's the DNA.
It is specifically designed to provoke an emotional response because the audience is titillated by the naughtiness of everyone's grappling with this topic.
A stunning indictment by Italy's highest criminal court of police.
They definitively acquitted them or pronounced them innocent and said no more trials.
It says the prosecution had stunning flaws and went to trial with an absolute lack of biological traces.
But as a journalist and somebody who is called upon to correct bullshit, I can tell you that it takes a lot more effort to correct it than it does to say it.
At every juncture, at every instance, true crime manages to transform itself into entertainment at the expense of people's actual real-life trauma and pain.
In my own life, it has, on the far end, made me feel the most alone and the most limited that I could possibly feel. Because it's not just the prison cell, right? It's coming back into the free world and realizing that all of the doors and windows are closed to you. And when you are boiled down to the worst experience of your life, you are suddenly not human like everyone else, and you don't belong to the rest of humanity.
In the 90s and 2000s, when cable was dominant, I sat on the other side of the desk from producers, and if they came in with a great idea, we'd say, fantastic. We have a 24/7 schedule to fill. How many of these can you make? Hence, there have been over 400 episodes of Forensic Files. The streamers are looking for really buzzworthy individual programs or multi-part limited series. So they're not in the business of ratings, they're in the business of getting you to sign up every month. They don't need a lot. They just need one great one.
I'm walking DNA testing has been done. They were powerful.
I watched a documentary made about the West Memphis 3.
No one wants to admit that they made a mistake.
We don't believe. It changed my mind. It brought more information. I said, I gotta find a journalist.
The hit podcast Serial.
Shattered streaming records.
Starting point of the true crime wave
Serial
of podcasts.
podcast raised serious doubt about his guilt, and today a judge agreed. KTLA's.
When I approached Sarah Koenig, I did not approach her because I wanted this to be an international phenomenon. I approached her because I needed to get Adnan home. I wanted to prove his innocence.
Adnan Syed was 19 years old when he was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his former girlfriend more than 20 years ago.
Serial was a phenomenon of untold proportions.
Prepaid call from
Adnan Syed.
I was on a train from Washington to New York, and I listened to it and I thought, oh, I get it. So the template that they established was in their tagline.
It's Serial. One story told week by week. I'm Sarah Koenig.
They were doing it in real time. They hadn't, by the midpoint of that season, finished the reporting.
For the last year, I've spent every working day trying to figure out where a high school kid was for an hour after school one day in 1999.
It was hard because week to week there was reporting that was irrelevant.
How'd you get to work last Wednesday, for instance? Drive, walk, bike? Was it raining? Are you sure?
Because she's like, this is all about, the whole case is about whether or not this guy remembers where he was 6 weeks ago.
Manual strangulation, meaning someone did it with their hands.
Adnan knew where he was on the day him and Lee disappeared. He has given a hour-by-hour rundown. Like, it's there.
Hayes' ex-boyfriend, a guy named Adnan Syed, was arrested for her murder. He's been in prison ever since.
What I would do is, and I think it made her crazy, is I would listen, and then I would write my blog that night.
Rabia Chaudhry expressed understandable criticisms. The fact that she sent Sarah Koenig evidence that clearly pointed away from Adnan that was not properly investigated or discussed.
I understand. But what I took away from the visit was, somebody is lying here.
He did it, I don't think he did it, I think this happened, I think this was wrong, I think this is a thing that people didn't find out yet.
The weekly ambivalence added to the excitement around the case. Everybody loves a whodunit. Is he a great guy or is he a psychopath?
Maybe Adnan really is innocent, but what if he isn't?
They were not going to give us enough information to figure that one out, right? That was not their job.
What do I know about Adnan that the jury didn't? Next time on Serial.
If you know what This American Life was all about, which is that it uses journalism as a way to tell stories, so that even though rigorous journalism is important and stories are fact-checked, the story comes first.
We still have a week to go. I'm still reporting. I am still reporting, and things could change between now and then, so.
In my own parents' home, she said this to me, that in my heart I think he's innocent.
As a juror, I vote to acquit Adnan Syed. I have to acquit. If you asked me to swear that Adnan Syed is innocent, I couldn't do it.
She could have influenced a lot of people if she had been honest in how she felt.
It's like a huge honor to be here and also to be the first podcast to ever win a Peabody.
I put Serial in infotainment. It's not about Adnan's story. Serial is about Sarah Koenig's story. Serial is what brought new evidence to the case, but Serial was not going to exonerate him. But true crime reporting has had a tremendous impact on the justice system. It was enough for us to take and run with.
This is perhaps the critical piece to this.
An HBO documentary called The Case Against Adnan Syed highlighted additional evidence that should have been investigated.
When you are working on a case that you think is a wrongful conviction, you're only on one side, and that side is getting to the truth. So I discovered 2 other lawyers blogging, and then we came together to do Undisclosed.
We're 3 lawyers who are interested in the minute details of the case of the state versus Adnan Syed.
We'll never be as good at narrative as Serial, was, but at the end of the day, the facts are what mattered.
But it will be a run down many rabbit holes.
The whole purpose of the reporting is to exonerate this person, period.
Do you think he would still be there if it weren't for these podcasts?
He would not be home today without one person, and that's Rabia Chaudhry. She and her fight over these decades is the reason that he is home.
The tension between journalism and entertainment is so, it's a very complicated tension. It's a complicated relationship.
We're really not talking about journalism here, and it's really important to point that out. These programs are journalistic in nature and in their storytelling. They're fact-based, everything is vetted, but they're not designed as journalism. They're designed as stories of investigations.
This was around the time that Serial and The Jinx and even Making a Murderer were making big splashes. This was when true crime content was suddenly premium content.
Not since the O.J. trial has America been so fixated on a criminal Netflix documentary series, Making a Murderer.
Mr. Avery's blood was found inside of Teresa Halbach's vehicle.
I'm innocent.
Filmmakers are not just digging into gruesome details, but are trying to bring us like a psychological, cinematic experience to people.
Streaming has had a tremendous impact on true crime storytelling.
People around the world, millions.
Everyone is talking about Making a Murderer and the trials of Stephen Avery.
I promise you, I know where I was working and at probably every other network, the boss, kicked the door open and said, "Where's our Making of a Murderer? Where's our Jinx?"
Durst was wanted for murder in Texas, Westchester County, New York.
The Jinx, right? They were doing the story about this enigmatic guy who maybe killed somebody or not. They didn't know he was going to walk into the men's room and admit to killing somebody.
There it is. You're caught. What the hell did I do? Kill them all. Of course.
What it showed was how involved and engrossed the audience can become in trying to solve a crime and in following an investigation.
Billionaire heir Robert Durst.
Billionaire under arrest.
On the murder of that
Durst versus the world.
It was issued because of a television show.
Crime documentaries let that aficionado audience take a deep dive.
I told him, O.J., you're breaking the laws of God.
In the 90s, when I saw O.J. Simpson on the freeway in his Bronco, there was this huge disparity on what people believed was true. And I'm gonna be honest, until that documentary on Netflix, I still didn't believe he was guilty until I really saw the evidence. I was like, whoa.
I can somebody say I can kill this woman.
But it was riveting TV. And I, of course, grew up in a black home, but I inhabited white spaces during the day, and there was a very stark contrast in what people believed. You ugly murderer! You ugly murderer! But before that, I just believed that there was a crooked, racist cop that blamed him.
The true crime genre has become one of, let's see if we can do better than the prosecutors and cops.
In the 4 weeks since the series was released, a frenzy of binge watching, fueling conspiracy theories and outrage.
Let's undo this unjust conviction, or, let's solve this mystery as they didn't.
Both among those who think Avery was wrongly convicted, framed even, and those who think the documentary is at best misleading.
Wake up, Netflix!
I remember being terrified when the Netflix documentary about my case was coming out.
Did you kill Meredith?
How did things get to this point?
Amanda Knox.
The filmmakers made my documentary while I was still on trial. And I was afraid that I was never going to have the chance to tell my side of it and explain my innocence to people. And I trusted them. Either I'm a psychopath in sheep's clothing, or I am you. I was afraid when it first came out, but what I discovered, I did not anticipate this happening is after it came out and after it became public, I was flooded on social media with messages from people saying that they were sorry. They were sorry that I was just a throwaway piece of entertainment trash to them for so long. And so the power of storytelling and how we all are participating in how a story can genuinely directly impact a judicial outcome. I think that's what my documentary revealed.
Welcome back. Digital tech democratized true crime. Suddenly, anyone with a microphone on a mission can be a crime fighter. Some dogged journalists went the extra mile and moved into the community in Mississippi, where Curtis Flowers had 6 trials, 4 convictions, and more than 20 years on death row for a quadruple murder he did not commit. The 2018 podcast, In the Dark, ticked all the boxes. New witness testimony, yup. A corrupt district attorney, you betcha. Their podcast, name-checked by SCOTUS when it overturned Flowers' conviction and set him free, that too. What kind of a guy quits his job to solve a cold case from his childhood? Chris Lambert. His 2019 podcast, Your Own Backyard, helped police to finally put 19-year-old Kristen Smart's disappearance to rest. She was last seen in 1996 in the company of a fellow student, Paul Flores, who, you guessed it, turned out to be the killer. Millions of listeners celebrated when he was convicted with the help of a now unemployed podcaster. But the mother of all fan sleuth stories has the mother of all titles. Don't Fuck with Cats is a 2019 Netflix docuseries. It details how a Facebook group came together to cyberstalk an anonymous ghoul hosting cat torture videos on YouTube, and also tracked a murderer. Spoiler alert, it was Luca Magnotta, convicted of murdering university student June Lin. The message stands: don't fuck with cats, and also, don't fuck with true crime fans. Next up, the rise of the fans.
So true crime's impact on the justice system is kind of a really large and unwieldy and complex thing to appraise. Because for every audio documentary that led to a rectification of an injustice, you have everything else.
As an industry, true crime looks like any other industry. There were some folks here at CrimeCon who have enormous platforms, TV shows. It rhymes with state line. What we saw here this weekend is surviving family members because they want to continue the search to support their cause, to find or get justice for their loved one. So there are really big fish in the true crime pond and there are really little fish. But I think at the heart of it, everybody cares about crime, cares about victims, and cares about getting justice. Because true crime is so fascinating and captivating, people who were able to get a microphone for 30 or 50 bucks saw an opportunity and took it. I know I did.
And we host the podcast Fruit Loop Serial Killers of Color.
Most of the podcasts that we listen to focused on whole white serial killers.
Many of the victims are also BIPOC folks, and the media just doesn't focus on these people. We don't want their stories to get lost in the cracks.
For the next 8 years, a number of mysterious... We say on our show, murder and true crime and sexual assault and missing and murdered children are really difficult to talk about, and so is race.
We place a lot of moral and societal weight on our entertainment. But they would include the creation of what some critics have called true crime brain, in which you view everything as a true crime story, an increased belief in perhaps the failures of the justice system to a point that maybe you just don't believe in the justice system at all.
I think that consumers are becoming more sophisticated. So it's no longer just a guilty pleasure. It still is. But it's no longer just a guilty pleasure. Because social media and true crime content creation has become democratized, we also feel, I think, more responsibility in participating in it. That shift really does owe a lot to the cell phone footage of people being beaten down in broad daylight. It's those moments where people go, oh, it's real. It really happened. Someone died.
George Floyd was a turning point because we were all locked in our houses because of COVID, and everybody had to watch for 9 minutes a white police officer kill a black man.
The reality TV series Cops, which pitted officers against alleged criminals, was canceled this week. It had been on the air.
Cops, Live PD, those kinds of programs are told only from the point of view of the police. It shone a very bright light on how producers, and therefore networks, accepted their version of the story.
This genre can tell stories that are humane, that are more ethical than not ethical. We can strive for something better. I just want the people who consume it to strive for something better alongside.
So there's a thing that people say online now. If you found my body, like, mysteriously dismembered in the street somewhere, do not make a documentary about me. Like, I really do not want to do that to my family. TikTok, for example, is a huge space for people to build a kind of celebrity around true crime subjects.
Okay, I'm gonna give y'all my opinion and my timeline on all the facts.
Video has emerged of Gabby Petito and Brian
We now
Laundrie.
know what the final message that Gabby's mom received is.
Democratization without discernment is a pretty good recipe for something that produces kind of bad outcomes.
Dear listeners, what happens when a beautiful Instagram influencer goes missing while road tripping with her fiancé? The internet loses its collective Cocoa Puffs, turning an IRL tragedy into a true crime obsession. Gabby Petito was last seen in late August of 2021, weeks before her disappearance became a trending topic on TikTok. On September 14th, hashtag Gabby Petito had 1.4 million views. 24 hours later, it was 9.7 million, and almost 200 million by the end of the week. Some say the desire to rescue a damsel in distress was cover for the indiscriminate dissemination of crime porn. Petito's body was recovered. The cause of death? Strangulation. A month later, her fiancé Brian Laundrie's remains were found, and a journal confessing to her murder.
I can't be the Brian that you're just like showing off in the world.
Something about this is not right.
Less than a year later, Lifetime Network released a TV movie about it all. The internet outrage machine went crazy for the grieving Petito family, likely driving up the ratings.
You gotta be a fucked up person to make a biopic when their family doesn't agree. Them saying no, me being like, okay, I'm gonna do it anyway.
Who's to blame? The blood or the tiger? Maybe in the era of social media and murder, it's the zoo.
Petersons. To us.
A woman and her 15-month-old child were murdered in their home.
Beach 911.
In this crowded media environment,
There's been a murder, a homicide.
how do you get something to resonate with that audience? Having some familiarity with a famous case is important, right?
I think she was telling him to do it.
It's good storytelling. There's nothing evil or sleazy about it. It's relatively inexpensive to produce, and it's in the public domain.
I was silenced. I want my voice back.
When a person becomes a public figure, there is this sense that they no longer have ownership of their own life and their own story.
Amanda, I hope this trip is everything you dreamed of.
There's a million versions of me that exist out in the world in people's imagination. I've become a little bit like Dracula, where everyone gets to have their own take.
The father of the girl, the American student.
Stillwater was the latest example of it.
Allison came here for college, and that's where she met this girl, Lena.
I found out about Stillwater when a trailer for the movie came out.
But everybody thinks that I killed her.
It was being advertised as the Amanda Knox story. Here we go again.
I'm trying to get my little girl out of jail. That's all I give a damn about.
Basically, just a dramatized version of the prosecution's account of the story.
And a new movie getting some scrutiny this morning. Amanda Knox is raising issues about Stillwater, which stars...
And so when the film Stillwater came out, she first wrote a long tweet thread, and subsequently this became an essay published in The Atlantic called Who Owns Amanda Knox?
She's done a lot of things to publicize her side of the story. In some ways, she's dug herself deeper into the briar patch. Once you become a media creation, I don't really know how you undo that.
Matt Damon, who plays the father in the film, went out of his way to go to Oklahoma to meet regular Joe average guys that he would be representing in the film, but no one bothered to reach out directly to me. No one.
Yeah, what have you got?
Got 2 victims in Brentwood.
Brentwood? Nobody gets killed in Brentwood.
I have really struggled with how Hollywood sort of has hijacked true crime.
So-called trial of the century, captivating the country Started out once as the again. network's most watched premiere, and The People vs. O.J. Simpson sustained that momentum right through.
What I'm uncomfortable with is the disrespect. If you're going to make money off of us, the least you could do is have a conversation with me.
The enduring fascination with Dahmer also kicking up controversy.
There was a tremendous amount of controversy or backlash to it.
Rita Isbell, one of his victim's sisters, objecting to the series' rendition of her in-court denunciation of Dahmer in 1992.
There's a murky area between what's the truth and what's fictionalized and what is sensationalized. And I think that when you have the Hollywood perspective, it gives you this false sense of grief. It gives you a false sense of loss.
Do you think he did it? She was terrified.
There's a whole subgenre of true crime programming. If much of what we're talking about is called a whodunit, there's the whydunit, meaning inside the criminal mind. And there are probably half a dozen, I hate to say it, brand name killers that the audience always wants to hear more about, probably because their crimes are so unspeakable. Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer.
First of all, that show was a hit. It became itself a kind of mini cultural phenomenon.
The 500 million viewing hours Dahmer racked up its hits since the likes of Bridgerton.
It reveals a troubling cultural trend: serial killers as entertainment.
The murder of someone should not be intellectual property.
Outrage is a thing that gets you attention.
Victims' families felt like they were reliving everything all over again.
You can find a lot of TikTok algorithm loops in which a lot of typically young people noting Dahmer in a positive light.
That participation in social media rewards those who express the most shocking and vociferous opinions.
When they killed Jeffrey, I got teary-eyed.
Technology does not judge. Technology just facilitates.
Click away and then send, and you don't think anything of it. I mean, for God's sakes, just put your name out there then. If you're gonna send me death threats, what did I do? What did I do to you, stranger?
To become a character in the stories that we're all just that are in the ether, that we all casually absorb, that we all find ourselves chatting about over the dinner table. Stop using me. Let me take this lens that you've had focused on me and turn it around. And what does this all reveal about you and all of us?
What happens when Seeing Justice Done happens on Netflix first?
I can't get in touch with our kids. Something felt wrong.
Sins of Our Mother tells the story of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. The couple are charged with the murder of her 2 children, ages 16 and 7 years old, and allegedly killing his wife and her former husband. The 3-part doc is loaded with evidence.
I was livid, upset, crying.
Sick, twisted. A search warrant executed on his house, and they found human remains.
This is all before their day in court. Netflix obviously launched the series to land during what stood to be a sensational trial. But the Idaho judge overruled the streamer, banning cameras in the courtroom. He cited pressures on witnesses and counsel. Quote, knowing their every expression, utterance, and appearance will be captured and circulated without control in perpetuity, end quote. And how performing for cameras could impact their credibility in front of a jury.
Literally months of people dying and coming up missing.
Inflated ego over everybody else.
But it may not matter. The TikTok jury has watched the documentary and declared a verdict.
This devil right here is responsible for at least 3 people being unalived.
I truly hope they get the death penalty.
Most people in this country do not have a lot of interaction with the justice system. Like, this is our own prejudice and bigotry that it's like, the justice system is there to deal with problem people. There is due process here. They will get it right. And if there's a conviction, it's because they did it right. We have like 400 million downloads. I hope that undisclosed listeners, like we've tainted every jury pool in the country. So they don't believe in the junk science and they don't believe it when a prosecutor walks in and just tells them something. They understand that opening and closing remarks, you can make up stuff and have no evidence to back it up. I hope we taint the jury pool in favor of justice.
We're coming to the end, dear listeners. Let's go back to Adnan Syed. Despite blogs, podcasts, documentaries, and threads inspiring millions to know his story, it wasn't the media that freed him. Syed exhausted all legal channels. It was the end of the line. Except Maryland had brought in legal reforms to revisit cases just like his. Now, the same wobbly testimony, dodgy science, manipulated eyewitnesses that were available to prosecutors at the time of his conviction were found lacking. Thanks to true crime media, in the case of Adnan Syed, justice was seen to be undone. But was justice done? Hae Min Lee's killer is still out there.
The vast majority of crimes go unsolved, and families and victims are left bereft of any kind of sense of justice. Storytelling doesn't just help us to make sense of things, it also brings attention to things. Letting people know that that crisis exists requires a dependence upon true crime, and at the same time, it comes with a cost. We don't want to be monsters. And I think one of the things that we're discovering as true crime consumers is that we have been participating in something harmful that we thought was harmless.
A piece of true crime media can be fascinating and interesting for the way it brings you through the investigative process, for the way it highlights things about the justice system, about American society. But let's never forget that somebody died. A tragedy befell somebody, that there are people continuing to grieve. That aspect of the story is as important as everything else.
I'm often asked about the media coverage with my brother's case. I wish that people would ask us where they could help, where they could advocate. I wish people would ask how to be of service. I wish people would ask how we're doing.